Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming. It's so exciting to have you all here, and it's going to be a wonderful discussion. Tonight here at Arte Julia, we have in discussion two authors of historical fiction that I don't know if you've read everything, but you should. It's Heather Webb and Greer McAllister. Heather is a Connecticut local. Am I correct in that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I know most of it.
And she, as many of you may know, she's the author of 9 historical novels, one of which, The Rodin's Lover, was a Goodreads top pick. And Last Christmas in Paris won the Women's Fiction Writers Association Star Award. Her newest book releases tomorrow. So you guys are really getting a sneak peek at this. This is the launch. We are officially launching here. Her new book, Queens of London, is based on true events. And I'm going to let her tell you about it. So it's very exciting. In conversation tonight with Greer McAllister, best-selling author of historical fiction as well, including The Arctic Fury, which if you haven't read yet, we have a few copies here tonight.
By the way.
And also the epic fantasy series, The Five Queendoms. Sorry, excuse me. Her debut novel, The Magician's Lie, was a USA Today bestseller and a Target Book Club pick selection. So these ladies have between them just absolutely extraordinary. So thank you for coming, and let's welcome them.
All right. I think we're absolutely thrilled to be here. We're absolutely thrilled that you are here. And I could just ask Heather questions for hours and hours, but I think we're probably going to keep it to a pretty tight, 45 minutes to an hour. And then I will ask some questions, but of course we want to know what you want to know as well. So I'll kick it over to the audience at some point. But I think, yeah, we've been for
Kind of a long time.
But I saw a Facebook memory just a couple of weeks ago. 9 years ago, I was at a bookstore in conversation with Heather, and today I am also at a bookstore in conversation with Heather, which is awesome.
But I was in Brooklyn for your book.
Yes, yeah, that was The Magician's Lie back.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway,
Angie, you can come up front.
I'm trying not to walk in front of everybody.
just getting started. But I think probably to start off, as Bonnie said,
A little tip?
give us a little, give us your Queens of London elevator pitch.
So Queens of London is about the first all-female crime syndicate, which in other terms is an all-girl gang, but she doesn't love that. It's at 1925 London, and the leader of the gang is Diamond Annie, who's the most notorious thief in UK history. And she goes head to head with the very first female chief inspector at Scotland Yard. So they come together in the middle of a heist. They cross paths with 2 other characters, which is an orphan who is 10 years old and she's half Indian. And she has a little dog sidekick that she meets out on the streets, and a very underestimated but beautiful shop clerk. So I have 4 points of view. And they all come together and show very different sides of what's happening with the law and this sort of underbelly of London at that particular time. It's a very, very fast-paced, very fun book that also has a lot of heart. And it's a little bit gritty. It's all the things I love. So hopefully you will love that too. So
awesome. And just that perfect blend of history and fiction that only historical fiction can provide, right? You've got 4 points of view, 2 based on real people, and then 2 more sort of inspired by research, drawn from real types of people at the time, but not specific. A specific orphan and a specific shop clerk.
Right. I think I like both. I think that, of course, the fact is really cool to learn, but you get to play more as a writer if you bring in some fictional characters. You can really kind of expand and fill in more fun events and dialogue and interesting things that happen. So I usually try to pull in somebody who's fictional also.
So sort of the same way you approach The Next Ship Home, right?
Yes.
It's a novel about Ellis Island, but the stories that you can tell are more fictional. It's honestly, fiction is, it makes a lot more sense than the real historical record
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah,
Trying to
absolutely.
stick to things that actually happened. People say, oh no, that's not realistic. So you have to sort of stitch together
Yeah.
bigger things. So you started with the all-girl gang, right? You
Mhm.
came across that in your research, and so Diamond, also known as Alice Diamond, is sort of, does she still feel like the main character, or do you feel like she's part of the ensemble because you need all the different viewpoints to tell the full story?
She's sort of the main character. It feels like an ensemble cast for sure. I think you get a sense that she's more important than some of the others, but I don't know. I'm finding the reviews really interesting because everybody falls in love with a different character, which I didn't necessarily plan, but I think that's really cool. And some, Lillian Wiles, my inspector at Scotland Yard, she's kind of a typical cop where she's very fastidious and determined, and it's very, very hard to be a policewoman now, never mind 1925. So, she's against a whole lot. And I just thought, no one's gonna like a character like that. And I'm finding all these reviewers are like, I love Lillian so much. And then some really like my 10-year-old character. So I just think it really depends on, who you connect with. But that's good. That's
Yes, absolutely.
kind of
You
the fun.
want people to sort of pick their player and come in at that viewpoint. And you do such a good job with all of them that they all give us something to look. So you started with the big idea. Was it all along that all 4 viewpoints, or did you have 3 and then somebody came in later in the process?
I knew all along. And in fact, I heard my 10-year-old before I heard Diamond Annie, even though I knew I needed to write about her. I heard little Hera. And I'm saying that in a really strange way, but there's something that happens to a writer. You do, when you start thinking about an idea, you really do start to hear a character's voice in your head. Kind of like, if there's a character you love in a show that you watch, for example, you really attach to them, and you can kind of start thinking about how they would think. You think about the things they've said that you love, or that leave questions, or you're thinking about it. You can't wait to get back to the next episode. That's sort of what happens to a writer too. And I hadn't even written anything yet, and she was talking to me. So I thought, I don't know what else happens, but she has to be in every book. So
was she the most fun to write then, or was it just she came in and she was strong and you knew what she wanted, but you wanted to build them all out?
No, I loved them all. I like doing different points of view. I think that's a cool thing to show when you have something happening and then you show all these different thoughts and viewpoints around it. I did that, like you said, in The Next Ship Home, where I had an immigrant coming through Ellis Island, and then I had someone working at Ellis Island. It's 2 different points of view because I wanted to show how their lives were incredibly different. And that's what happens in this too. You get to see how different their lives are. So yeah.
They have very different lives, but they have some, I was going to say similar values, but obviously in some cases, the criminal gang's viewpoint diverges from the policewoman. But they both sort of have a orientation toward helping people and helping women specifically who are in bad straits.
Yeah. So one of the things you get in the book is that it doesn't matter what walk of life you come from. There's something about women where we just kind of, you put your hand out, don't you? And you help them up. And you really get that feeling in this book, even between the one, Diamond Annie going against the law and the policewoman trying to enforce it. And there's a good scene where my cop gets into a lot of trouble in a dark alley outside of a club at this time. And Diamond Annie comes along. And there's a moment where she could let her go, and I'm not going to tell you what happens, but nonetheless, there's a whole lot of female camaraderie that happens. And I think that's a big theme in the book is, women helping women. And even if you don't mean to, it's just sort of this unspoken code that exists between us. And when that code is broken, it's not a good thing. And you get that feeling in the book for sure.
So with this one, you had the idea, you had the 4 points of view, sort of from the beginning, sort of all laid out. Was this one easier to write? I'm still waiting for my books to get easier to write.
No.
And yours is like, you're up to 9, I think, published.
So this was my 9th. Yeah. So, no, it's never get easier. So you just change what you do. You want, well, that's not totally true. So if you write genre fiction, like romance novels, they're mostly going to sort of follow a very similar format. But if you experiment a bit and you're talking about different time periods, there's always a challenge. And in this case, I'd never written 4 points of view. So I had to learn a whole new kind of software just so that I could figure out how to edit 4 points of view. Because writing them all down the first time is one thing, but then to go back and make it all make sense is a whole other thing. And I was having a hell of a time. I ended up making a giant storyboard that I pasted to my office wall with sticky notes. And it helped a lot, but I was still a little bit of a mess. So I don't know if you're familiar with Scrivener, but it's a very powerful program where you can upload a big document and you can manipulate files and chapters and things very easily. So I ended up working with that, and it was night and day. It was very, very helpful. I don't think I could have written this without it. So no, it doesn't get easier. I think you learn to trust your instinct over time, and that part gets easier. But in terms of your process, it changes constantly. But I kind of love that. That's what keeps it from being boring.
Yeah, you're not just doing the same thing over and over.
Never. It's always different.
Each new one is interesting for you. Each new one is interesting for readers because you're doing something that you haven't done before.
Yeah,
which
for
is
sure.
the scary thing and the wonderful thing. And you skip around in time and space between your different books. You don't have sort of a lane with
Right.
specifically, which is good. But you do have sort of your solo writing and then your co-writing with Hazel Gaynor. And I imagine those processes are very different.
They are. Yeah. So I do write on my own, but I sometimes write with another author. She's an English author, and we use Google Docs, which I think most of you are familiar with it. But if you're not, it's just a platform where people can write on it at the same time, and you don't have to be in the same time zone even. And yeah, we co-write historical novels together here and there. Ours tend to be a little bit more romantic. And the stuff I write tends to be a little bit grittier, but and more sort of book club fiction. And we have a book coming out this fall actually too. So it's going to be a hectic year.
Do you have it? You want to talk to them?
Yeah, it's called Christmas with the Queen, and it's about the early years of Queen Elizabeth's reign. And she and Philip are sort of in the background coming through the book, but the main characters are a royal chef, which is I'm a huge foodie, so that was super fun to write, and a female correspondent to the BBC, news correspondent, and they fall in love amidst Sandringham, which is where the royals celebrate Christmas, that infamous fog in 1952, where it brought a lot of tragedy. So there's you get a mix of, it's a little bit bittersweet. But yeah, it'll be a fun book.
Yeah, nice to have a little romance. And so it's Christmas, it's coming out in the fall so that people can buy it well in advance of
Right
Christmas,
around election time, when you need to escape the universe. And you're gonna need, like, you take me to Christmas with the Queen in the 50s. Yeah, so.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the cover process? I don't know if this one was an easy one or a hard one.
Sure. So first of all, the titles and the covers, you always come up with something. I actually titled this Diamond Girls because Diamond Annie, and she calls her gang her girls, but girls in titles, it's not that I love girls in titles, and I know a lot of people feel very strongly about that being diminutive. So the publisher was like, hey, we want girls in the title. How about Queens of London? And my girlfriend Hazel, my co-writer, said, who is English, I don't know, that feels a little bit like women of the night and dance clubs dressing up. If you were English, that's what we're gonna see. I'm like, oh god, okay. And they ignored that and said no. And so when they came with this concept, I actually really loved it, but I just said, it looks like Downton Abbey society ladies going to a party. Can you put a knife in her hand? This woman carries a blade with her everywhere. Diamond Annie does. And so sure enough, they did. And it's It's a little bit subversive. They made the
Mhm.
title bigger and they kind of stuck it down here, but there's a knife there. All right. Fair enough.
And this is one of my favorite first lines.
Oh,
In case you wondered whether the knife shows up or not, it shows up in the first sentence of the book. Alice wiped her knife clean. That's that first sentence. Like, all right, I know what I'm getting. I know this character. She's not a chef.
she's not a chef.
That's not what that's
It's
about.
not a romance. She's not a chef. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So ironically, the first title I had for the Arctic Fury was Queens of the Arctic.
Really?
It was, and we have the same publisher and they mixed Queens.
I'm really glad because that would not have fit.
It wouldn't have worked, and then I also had a book that was about Queens. It was fantasy coming out, and they felt like Queens at that time, and this was 2020, so just like a slightly different market. They said they felt like Queens read too YA and too fantasy, which, you know,
Okay,
different
whatever.
people involved, whatever. The process is the process, and we ride along and we try to nudge things in the direction that we like.
And this is about an Arctic expedition with 13 women.
13 women. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So also very sort of using history as a jumping off point, there was a very famous expedition called the Franklin expedition that was lost in the Arctic in the 1840s or 1850s. It's been a while since I worked on this one. But they were looking for the two lost ships until the 2000s. That was how very, very lost that expedition was. So instead of following the real story of the men who were lost in that expedition, there was the wife of the leader of that expedition, Lady Jane Franklin, actually funded a bunch of expeditions to go out and look for her husband's lost expedition, and mine is sort of a what if story. What if she had sent an all-female expedition instead of just sending men upon men upon men? So all of the women in it are inspired by different figures of the time. But it is on the historical fiction spectrum, it is definitely more fiction than history. And like you said, we're trying different things all the time. We're doing different challenges all the time. This one, I said to our editor, Shayna, I really want to write 13 points of view. She's like, okay. But it's just, most of it's in one point of view. And then there's a chapter from each of the other 12 women on the expedition. But it's a dual timeline and sort of goes back and forth between the Arctic expedition, and then a year later, the leader of the expedition is on trial for the death of one of the expedition members in Boston, which is where I live now, although not where I lived when I wrote the book. So it's funny how these things happen. But yes, thank you for pointing that out.
So I want to talk a little bit about research.
Mhm.
So research is the fun part. I did go to London a couple times. And I ended up, first and foremost, I haven't spent a ton of time in London since I was a really small kid with my dad being stationed over there. So it was fun to go back and be an adult and just check it out. So I literally spent several days doing nothing but walking through all the neighborhoods south of the Thames. You know, north of the Thames is where a lot of the stuff is that you know about, you know, the things that you want to go visit, the big sites. But south of the Thames is where the neighborhoods get a little, I mean, now it's pretty gentrified, but there's still some grittier parts. I did come across, unfortunately, a couple of drug deals and hightailed it in the other direction. But I walked through some of these neighborhoods where this gang lived and operated. I also ended up in a place called the Borough Market. Has anyone been to the Borough Market? Love the Borough Market. It's what would you liken it to here? It's just it's a foodie stall place. You know, you go in and there's all these different Faneuil Hall, yes, but in more of an open air space. But yes, it's a lot like Faneuil Hall. That's a great example. So there's all these different stalls. There's a big oyster booth. There's, you know, risotto and, you know, meat pies and all kinds of stuff. But this is where the gangs used to meet because people would congregate there. They'd be buying, you know, they would toss out a few pennies and buy a little something and walk around eating it and lose their purse. So even today, still, there's a huge sign, which I took a picture of course, that said, beware of pickpockets. But the gangs would meet there, both the Elephant Castle, which was the male counterpart to the 40 Elephants. The 40 Elephants is the actual female gang that I talk about in the book. A bunch of them would meet there and do a little business, have a couple of pints, take a few wallets, hit the road. And so of course I had to go there and check that out too. The food was great. But I was, very cognizant of, okay, this used to be the playground for the gangs. I also went to a horse race because horse racing is where a lot of gang activity happened, where they had bookies there and they were pressuring the bookies and everybody that was, sort of betting on the horses and whatnot. And I do have a scene in the book that takes place there. So that was really fun. I had never been to a horse race before, let alone in England. So I took a train out, it was kind of close to Windsor, the Ascot Royal Races, and spent some time out there. And so the research was really fun. Of course, who doesn't love tooling around England and anywhere, honestly. And so when I was finished with the book, I actually had the opportunity to go back in October because I was meeting Hazel for Christmas with the Queen. We went to Sandringham and other places. But I had a finished copy of Queens of London, so I walked around London taking pictures of it and everything. And I was loitering outside of Scotland Yard. And finally a cop came out and he's like, "Can I help you?" Pacing up and down, taking pictures everywhere with this book. And I said, "Oh, I wrote a book. There's a Lillian Wiles." He's like, oh, she was a cop, she was one of the first police women. And I'm like, yes, she was, and she's in this book. So that was very cool. And I was in contact with the Crime Museum through Scotland Yard as well. I actually didn't go in their museum because it turns out most of the stuff they had there, believe it or not, I could get at UConn in Connecticut, including Lillian Wiles, my policewoman in this book, wrote a memoir, and there's only 20 copies left in the world.
Wow.
One of them is at UConn.
Wow.
I looked everywhere, and I think 18 of them are in the UK somewhere. And I forgot where the 19th copy was. The 20th was at UConn. And it turns out that there's this very big section about the history of the police, both women, male and female, at UConn, and that's why they had a copy. So isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's wild.
That felt a little serendipitous. I live in stores, Mansfield stores, so
Wow.
I'm like, I'll just, 7 minutes down the road, go get this memoir. I did do a no-no and I photocopied it, the whole book. About 70 pages or so, but I photocopied the whole book so I could reread it and highlight and write all over it, that kind of thing. So the research was a lot of fun. My 10-year-old is half Indian. Her mother was born in Gujarat, which is a silk weaving Western, a town where they did a lot of silk weaving in Western India. And a lot of British foot soldiers were stationed there. So the way it's set up is the parents are there, they meet and fall in love. They die of cholera. The daughter is shipped to London to be taken care of by the horrible uncle. And she ends up running away. He's going to send her to this terrible boarding school in Northumberland, England, which is very, very far north and kind of raw and not a nice place to live. So I ended up actually having a American Indian writer read for me just to make sure that I got some of those cultural pieces right. And she loved it, and I made her cry, and there was a moment when she got a little mad at me. So that's good. I took that as a good sign. So the research was fun, and having the readers come in and look at it's been really fun. So
yeah, I think there's a sense that with contemporary writers, I've never been one, but I hear that they travel to the places that they write about because it makes sense. You can absorb how the place feels. You can see things that you can describe better. For historical novelists, it's a little different because you can go to the Borough Market you can't go to the borough market in 1925.
Right.
Right, so you're extrapolating, but I find that it does help.
It still helps a lot. Just the layout. I mean, you can see it, the layout in that market was nothing like I imagined. I mean, I pulled it on Google and you can even sort of map it out, but it doesn't fit in your head the same way as going and seeing it and walking through it, seeing how it connects to other pieces along the street and what people are doing inside and what it smells like. That's the kind of stuff that doesn't feel like it's that important. But if you're writing the past, especially, I mean, I guess anytime, you want it to feel alive and really vibrant, and you want to put those facts in there to make it, I want you to smell those chicken mushroom pies that were ridiculously good. I mean, I want you to smell that kind of stuff, and I wouldn't know unless I went. So yeah, I think it's really important still to go, and I try to, and it can be expensive. So I don't always do as much of it as I'd like, but I do my best.